So before I use my smoker, I like to check the hopper, make sure I've got enough fuel. And between uses, while the smoker's still cold, I like to take it all apart, clean it off, scrape off the grease, anything that's built up, any fuel or any ash in there. That helps reduce any chance of having a fire, which would ruin the meat. And then this smoker, when I ignite it, goes through a cycle and it gets up to 150 before it's really ready to go. So I like to buy tri-tip in packs of 2 because our family loves it. And if we do have any leftovers, it's really good as steak and eggs the next morning. And you might have some fat or silver skin that you need to trim off, but usually tri-tip doesn't have too much. As far as seasoning goes, you can use salt and pepper. I like to use this seasoning from our local store. It's got some brown sugar in it as well. Just make sure you cover the meat thoroughly, because these are large pieces of meat and you want to get that seasoning in there as much as possible. So when the meat's ready and the smoker's hot, I like to scrape the grill one more time. That heat helps make it a little bit easier to get it clean. And then go ahead and put the meat on the grill. The best heat seems to be in the middle on this one, but every smoker's a little bit different. And I've got a thermometer that I try and get in the thickest part of the meat here. Make sure that cable is not in the way. And then I'm going to crank it up to 225. You can smoke it a little bit slower if you want to, but 225 works out well. And then I'm going to leave it on there until it gets to 127. But at about the 100, 105, I do like to flip it. We'll get some grill lines on there. They don't really survive the searing process usually, but still, feels like I'm doing it right. You can see that nice pink, red, smoked color. And we like ours medium rare. So at about 127, I'm going to pull it off here and wrap it in tin foil. That helps keep the juices in and helps keep it warm until we're ready to sear it, which will raise that temperature up just a little bit to get it right in that medium rare range. You want to sear that tri-tip at a pretty high temp. I'm going to sear it in butter, and I add some rosemary in there. It's a really good flavor with this seasoning especially. My temperature might be just a little too high. I might be burning the butter just a little bit. But the real end goal is to sear it up, get that temperature up to the medium rare range, but also to burn it just a little bit on the outside. So you only need to sear it for about a minute or 2 on each side. Go ahead and just flip it over, take a look at it, see if it's got the black that you like. Some of this is aesthetics. And because it's such a thick piece of meat, you can do it on all the edges. And then we're going to let it sit for 15 minutes before we slice it up. So after we sear it, we're going to let it sit for 15 minutes before we cut it up. Now the goal with beef is you want to cut against the grain, but on tri-tip it actually curves. So you can see there's a long end and a short end, and we're going to cut it into 2 segments here. And that makes it a little bit easier to cut against the grain. So here, this first cut is actually cutting with the grain. You can see that's not how we want it with the rest of them. So the rest of them we're going to make perpendicular to that first cut. And I'm actually slicing a little backwards here, but I wanted to make sure you could see on the camera those juices and exactly how good it is to cut it against the grain, doing it in these 2 segments. Between the butter and the myoglobin from the beef, this can get pretty messy, especially cutting 2 of them, so make sure you've got some paper towels handy so it doesn't drip on the floor. Slice the long segment, same as the short, 90 degrees from that first cut, and then my favorite part's actually the very tip because it's got all the seasoning, so I usually eat it right after cutting. So the second one I'm cutting here, I'm going to get it from a different angle on the camera so you can see those 2 different segments and how it looks cutting against the grain. And then that rosemary that we use to sear it makes a pretty good garnish. So after you plate it and get it kind of organized, I like keeping it on there. Not only does it look nice, but the smell helps add to the flavor.